Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of My Creative Life with Kel Sweetie, where we read books, we make art, and essentially do whatever our creative hearts desire. Today is the kind of second to last, but the last official video for the I Love Black Horror readathon. I kind of wanted to start this video off just really stating I have had such a great month. I am so lucky to have found just all of the folks that I've become like online friends with and talk about books with, who love horror and thriller and unhinged sad girl lit, and just also the sweet things about my work and my art and everything that I've been making all month for the readathon to give recs and everything. It has just been so great. I did my first live this month and I did my first reading sprints, which I honestly and truly thought that I was going to be the only one in there. Me and maybe one or two other like YouTube friends that I've made as of late and recently and stuff. And they're at most like 33, I think, is where we hit the highest of y'all in there, and that's just still insane to me, and I had such a great time. So I'm just like so excited to keep on doing those in the future, and I just appreciate anybody who took time out of their day to show up. I know that it is hard to do a live sometimes, and with like schedules and stuff like that, I was truly blown away by the support, both there, on here, on my Instagram, on TikTok, on Goodreads, like wherever. Y'all have just been really great, and honestly this month has been fantastic. I've just met so many great people and so many great creators. I will be linking some creators that I found recently down below, and Black creators at that for you to go follow. Just because February is about to be over does not mean that Black voices all of a sudden are no longer valid to keep on listening to and watching and getting recommendations from. This month I started because I was struggling to find Black horror novels and horror and thrillers that I really connected with. And by doing this, doing the research, seeing other people's TBRs and everything, I really learned a lot, and I just want to continue doing that throughout the rest of the year, not just with Black voices, but just diversifying period in moments like these. So I'm really excited to see what that looks like for the rest of the year for everybody. Today, we're actually going to have a bit of a discussion. It's going to be one-sided, but I hope that it creates some sort of discourse within the comments and just with, you know, within the community itself about Black horror, and one, its importance, but as well as its downfall. I wanted to talk a bit about that because I feel like, we pat each other on the back and we go, yay, we read Black horror, but what does it mean that we read Black horror, you know, this month? We spent, 29 days reading Black horror and hopefully more. But what does that mean? What are the implications of that? And how can we be better at it, those who are even writing it currently, or be better readers within it, and experiencing it, and watchers, like as far as films and stuff. And I just kind of wanted to have a little discourse about it. Nothing too crazy. That's why I didn't really do this on live or anything, but I really wanted to express my feelings and my, I guess, like reactions and my reflections after reading and researching throughout this month. And I hope that it's not boring. I hope that it's something a little interesting and gets you start thinking a little bit more about, Black horror and what it is and what does it mean. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. So I wanted to start this conversation off with the topic of importance. I think to start out the gate with the positivity of it, and then go into what I found research-wise after the month of recommendations, and then end it kind of in reflections that I feel like that's a good lineup. That's kind of like your little TLDR of how today's video is gonna kind of go as far as like my reflections and like recommendations and stuff like that and research. I think that that's a pretty good way to like set up this so that it feels very fluid, I suppose. So with that being said, I really want to get into the conversation of the importance of having Black voices in horror and how nuanced that is. Obviously, it is important across the board for people of color's voices to be implemented within horror. Please do not take that statement as I don't think that we need Black stories around romance or fantasy or crime or mystery or whatever. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it is revolutionary for those voices to be in horror. The reason why it's revolutionary for Black voices and POC voices to be in horror is because of the fact of our experiences in the societies that we live in tend to be horrific. The news, politics, Black bodies being hurt or killed are something that we are very easily accessible. It's very easily accessible to see these things on the news. It's very easily accessible to see these things on your Instagram feeds and on your social media because we are constantly at war with a society that does not respect our bodies whatsoever. It's revolutionary to take that story and experience it through the lens of horror as we do our white counterparts, because it then means that we still have the right to experience fear, not just from our society, from our systems that are put in place, but we are able to even experience fear like our counterparts. And I think that there's something revolutionary in the idea that not only are we fighting to experience joy like our counterparts, white people, do, but every emotion. I think that that's a very complicated conversation. I think it's a very complicated conversation to go, I want to be scared how the blonde white chick in Scream or is scared when Ghostface goes to kill her. You know, it means something different when that woman is now a Black woman, and it's no longer Drew Barrymore, you know, hanging from a tree. And what does that mean? And the history behind it. I got into this conversation recently on my Instagram, and I'm going to post the post here. And it had to do with the conversation of Black sad girl lit. Some of y'all may know what that is. It's gotten really popular in the last couple of years, but essentially it has to do with unhinged women doing unhinged shit. And just not being pretty princesses and women not adhering to the male gaze and just being not perfect. And that has really been gone, like, is literary fiction. It's just out of this world right now as far as sad girl lit fic. And I think that has to do with many reasons, but a lot of that has to do with a lot of millennials and Gen Z, like women and girls are just like, I see myself in that because we're all anxious, depressive as a community right now. The person who had posted the original post, Rocky is Reading, go follow her here on YouTube. She's really great. She had mentioned, she did a YouTube video and somebody in her comments had said, yes, bring on the Black sad girl, like, lit and everything, or bring me more Black sad, like, sad girl something or another. And she had asked us, is that weird to be begging for, like, Black trauma? And while I don't know, I can never say, like, where that specific viewer was coming from to comment that. I did tell her in her messages, I'm not sure where they're coming from, but I do want more Black girl sad lit fic. It's a very long title now that I've added everything. I told her that I want to see more than just, I read horror and thriller and unhinged like, you know, stories about non-perfect people. And I want to see myself in those stories because, one, I find them entertaining. And I also find that I love, now this isn't for all horror and thriller, but I love a good amount of horror and thriller because I feel like they're like perfect allegories and like they analyze society at its rawest. It causes you to think and it causes you to like really look at what the story is really trying to tell you about the people who are in it. I want to experience that as a Black woman, seeing herself in those stories because I am not perfect. Nobody is, but I feel like because we are constantly trying to prove ourselves as human and as these beings who are not volatile, Black people do not get to be horrific. And that's a problem because then Black people are not allowed to feel all scopes of emotion, are not allowed to be all scopes of people because of the fact that we are constantly trying to prove ourselves on the higher end of a spectrum because of a society that is telling us that we're already on this end of the spectrum. So you don't get stories like Swarm, where it's a queer Black girl who is killing people left and right and is disgusting and outrageous and crazy. You don't get stories like that very often because we are constantly trying to prove that we are not that. And while, yes, we as a homogenous being and in the homogenous of it all are not that, there are folks who are that. And to remove those stories makes it so that we are not nuanced and multidimensional, which we completely and utterly are. I know that that's a lot that I just kind of put out there, but it is a lot. It's a lot wanting Black people to experience horror. It's a lot to say I want to see Black people experience thrills and chills and scares that are outside of my race, which is something I'll get to in a moment, just the way that our counterparts do. In a way that our counterparts do, and can experience in this safety that a book allows, that a movie allows, and everything. That's why writing Black voices in a genre like horror is so revolutionary and so important. It in itself is saying we can experience those things outside of our race and the constant battle that we are having to say that we are not the makers of those things. We are not the representation of those things. But yet that same pressure is not put on our counterparts to do the same, but yet they experience those stories majority of time. If you go to your horror section at your local Barnes, you will see 5 million shelves of Stephen King writing about white people experience horror. The Shining is taken out of this because Stephen King got it right in that one. That's a whole nother day. I really want a video where I break down why The Shining is a race theory book that has to do with white male fragility, but that's a whole nother day. I know I got deep. I got real deep, but the topic itself is so important and nuanced that I feel like we constantly, and if you even notice on Bookstagram, one thing and one reason why I also started this readathon is that I could not easily find Black bookstagrammers and Black booktubers. Even now, having the readathon, while it has helped bring me to a lot of people who are in those spaces, it is still very hard to find on your own Black booktubers and Black bookstagrammers in the first place. But when you do find them, they're more than likely reading fantasy or they're reading romance. They're not reading horror or crime or thrillers. And there's a reason for some of that. And talking to some friends, they have stated, well, maybe it's the escapism of it all. Maybe it's wanting to see like like Black love, a love story, or to see themselves being in this fantastic story, this mythological story where they're usually not seen and everything. And I completely agree. And I know I'm not special. I know I'm not the only Black woman in all of the world who is reading horror and thriller and want chills and something darker. That's what kind of started my want for the readathon. Because I was explaining to another friend, and actually I've explained to a couple of people as to why I read horror. I feel like as a Black woman, I am constantly analyzing society because I live at the intersection of a majority of the minorities that are at a disadvantage in this society. I'm not at the precipice of all of them, and I know that I have plenty of advantages, but I am sitting at many intersections. And because of that, I am constantly analyzing my reaction to the world around me, the world around me's reaction to me. It's impossible for me not to, because I am experiencing life in it. And because of that, and because of what horror really is at its root, which is this analyzing of society and these fantastic and horrific and outlandish stories, Black people are actually more at an advantage to diagnose and analyze those stories, because we have been taught to do that basically from birth, just to survive in our societies. And even like Black horror writers, the idea is that they're more at an advantage to possibly really look at society in a raw way, because they've been doing so their entire lives in theory. That is my spiel on Black voices in horror and thriller and you know, darker lit fic and everything, and their importance. I think that there's many people who do not realize, both in the community, outside of the community, who don't realize the importance of a Black person talking about horrific events, talking about horror stories, and something that is not just feel good, in a way that doesn't necessarily exacerbate like the wound of like racial trauma, but like analyzes it. But that kind of leads me into my next part of this discussion, which has to do with racial trauma being the core of every Black story. And that's where the conversation led with Rakia's reading and the conversation of this begging of Black trauma and everything. I had told her that I think that my problem is that it is very hard in my research and everything from the month, and trying to give you guys, you know, week by week recommendations for shows and movies and books and everything to read in these genres, is also trying to find Black stories that do not at their core constantly have racial trauma as its plot. And this is something that we as a community as a whole need to work on. This is not to point the finger at one side or another. But one thing that I really did notice in my research is the core and the focus of racial trauma as horror. And I had a friend of mine who's a huge book reader who mentioned that her issue was that, like, these are real life stories and a lot of real life situations have to do with racial trauma. And I did not necessarily disagree with her, but I did disagree with the idea that, like, that's our story 24/7, because it's not. And I think that that was another reason why this readathon was started, was to dispel stereotypes that all Black people can write about is racial trauma. Because we can write about far more than that, because we're so much more nuanced than that as a people. And we're not homogenous in that, in the experience. We're not homogenous in our thoughts and our feelings. Yes, we do have a joint experience with our society and racial trauma, but if that should not be, and that's on the community as a whole, to really take a look that if all you can talk about when talking about horror is racial trauma, that is not all you need in order to write a Black character. I myself, I have depression and anxiety and stuff like that over things in the world constantly. And yes, absolutely, some of those things have to do with racial trauma and my gender inequality and 5 million queerness and 5 million other things, but also some of that stuff is just, I'm just as burnt out because this job is crap and the society and the economy is crap, and I'm just tired and I really just like a vacation. And in all honesty, my intrusive thoughts are about to get the better of me. And sometimes I would love to read about that. I would love to read about a Black character, a Black woman, who still feels authentic as such and everything, because it's impossible to not have an authentic character of color not read the world through that lens. A certain, very certain lens because of what society they've grown up in. That should never be the only plot and the only core to every story that we tell. And that is something that I found as a huge, huge problem in my research and in the books that I was finding. And I don't, it's a question of both, of many different things. Authors, are you sitting here and when you go to write a horror book, you're thinking, okay, let me write the next Get Out. And so you're automatically coming from, all right, racial trauma, racial trauma, racial trauma. Or are you trying to dig deeper than that? What are you experiencing that's even deeper than that? And is it enough for you to write about, to get it out on paper? Second, publishers, editors, are you finding these manuscripts and then going, yeah, everybody wants another Get Out, so let's put more racial trauma out on the horror market from Black authors? Or are you reading other books from Black authors and expecting more than just that when you're greenlighting books? Readers, are we sitting here and being lazy in our research when it comes time to sit here and do recommendations or tailor your TBR or do a reading challenge or whatever, and we're just going, oh, this one's got a lot of 5-star reviews, or I just Googled for a second and I found something, or I'm not Googling at all, I'm just taking recommendations that I keep on seeing on my Instagram, which is something really huge that was a big eye-opener for me when I barely read any books last year from people of color, but none of my horror reads were from Black people. Like I said at the very beginning of this month, that didn't sit well with me. And I realized the reason why I did that is because it's very easy to do that when Bookstagram or Booktube or BookTok or wherever you're getting your books, recommendations are an echo chamber of recommendations. Oh, I heard such and such reading this, so I'm gonna read this. And even for this readathon, it did sometimes come in, we still sometimes experience that, even though everybody was reading Black horror and everything. So I hope that Alexis Henderson cuts me maybe a small check. Because the amount of people who read Year of the Witching and House of Hunger during this readathon was insane. And while I will read both of those books because they were highly recommended and they seem like great books and everything, and I really want to support her, I am not mad at the support she's gotten. It did feel like an echo chamber where somebody went, oh, this is what I'm reading, and somebody read the synopsis and they go, that sounds good, I'm gonna read that too. All done. I'm not going to look up anymore. I'm not going to look for any other recs or anything. And then all of a sudden, everybody's reading the same book. And it just feels like we just all joined the same book club. And fine, absolutely heart in the right space. But make sure that you sometimes are a little self-aware. If you notice that everything you've read in the last couple of months was all because of something that you saw online, and not because you were going to your bookstore. When was the last time, I guess my question is, when was the last time you went to the bookstore and you went to the horror section or you went to the thriller section, a lit fic, and you looked at the cover and you went, that's an interesting cover. You picked it up and then you read the back of it and you went, huh, interesting book. I'm going to pick it up. Not, okay, this is my TBR that I have on Goodreads and I've cherry picked what I'm going to get, and I'm basically going straight to Barnes to pick up whatever it is. And that's because, and I know what I'm picking up because, such and such recommended it and I heard it 5 million times on my booktube, and I need to go read it to make sure that I'm staying in the know with what everybody else is reading and everything. It's so easy to accidentally not read people of color, Black voices, or anything when it's not saying that any of those book recommendations you're hearing in that vacuum are not good. Because I had no complaints with the books that I read last year. And they've got great plots. But what ends up happening is that you look up and you've taken all these recommendations and you're running out to go get those books so that, you're not out of the loop when somebody starts talking about it or whatever. And you haven't been thinking for yourself on what you wanted to read or curating what you want to read. And I think that that's on us as readers. So you know, this is across the board. Like, it's not like, hey, you're to blame or you're to blame. Everybody has to work together in order for things like this to happen. And also across every single line of defense, when a book, from books making to the book publishing to the book buying, we all have to work together in order for Black voices, in order voices of people of color, period, to be put at the forefront and be read. At every single level. And it's not simply to say like, oh, just say it's good because it's Black. I'm not in that business. I know some people are, but I'm not in that business. But just allowing those stories to get a chance, and allowing stories that have nothing to do with racial trauma, but simply a Black person experiencing scary shit, just like, you know, a white character can experience. Yes, the way they will experience it is very different to how the white character will experience it. But sometimes reading a book about a Black person experiencing a slasher-like film, or they're up in space and it's a sci-fi body snatcher type of situation, or I mentioned this before in my Black recommendations video, a movie like I Am Legend. I don't think that people realize how groundbreaking a movie like I Am Legend is. The last man on Earth, he's experiencing these virus-like zombies. He's trying to find a cure for them. He is a Black man, and he is experiencing this. It's, I mean, you know, it's action-filled and thrillery, but like, if you were to read I Am Legend, which you can, it's a book, go out and read the book, it is considered a horror. It's a horror book because it's technically vampire virus, apocalyptic type stuff. It is groundbreaking to like, and in the movie, it's not, you know, yes, he's out and Will Smith experiences, like, he goes toe to toe with like this vampire type who used to be a police officer, and you could tell by the way he was looking at him, or what, you know, like some rhetoric like that. It was simply, he was trying to survive in this end of the world situation best he could. That's it. And something about that's groundbreaking. It's different and it's groundbreaking to just exist. Sometimes I was telling one of my friends who I was talking to in regards to the conversation that was started from that DM that I had posted, sometimes I just want to be. I just want to be a Black vampire hunter. I just want to be a Black unhinged girl who just finally like loses it and lets her intrusive thoughts just go wild because she's been burnt out from her job. I just want to be a Black woman who falls in love with somebody in some small town like it's a Hallmark movie. I just want to be some Black witch who saves the entire world from from Voldemort, you know? Like, I just want to be, just to be, and not more than that. This one thing is just not in absolution of racial trauma, of me being Black in this world and constantly and utterly constantly thinking of it. I think that was one reason why Get Out, while yes, overtly, truly, utterly about race, obviously, I think it was very nuanced in the topics that it touched, in the jokes that it made, in the situations that Chris found himself in that film that only other Black people really got because of the shared experience, but also the nuances of the undercurrent of those experiences. That if you hadn't experienced it, you wouldn't know what you're looking at. You wouldn't know what you're looking for and everything. And I would love to just see more horror that experiences that. When I read The Woman Could Fly, while not a horror in my opinion, it was extremely nuanced in its experience as a Black queer woman in this very, very similar society to ours. And I think that was one thing that I loved about the book, was that it was so relatable. It didn't force like racism or racial trauma on you. You could feel it because it was just her experiencing it in the society that she experiences it in, by just noticing the nuances of being Black in that society. And I feel like, especially now, books like that are important, or else you end up in situations where people go, well, racism doesn't exist anymore because somebody isn't, hanging from a tree in the storyline or something. And it's not to say that those things aren't still happening, because they very much are, and that those stories still need to be published, but that there has to be some sort of balance, because when the nuance of racism comes up in a conversation about politics and race and everything, and somebody who isn't Black is in the conversation, they have nothing to hold on to. They have no research. They're sitting there going, that doesn't seem right. That seems like a you thing or whatever. Because keep in mind that these stories are as much for us as Black people as they are for other people to read them and to understand more our experience. That is the reason for sharing stories, for storytelling, is to share the experience, to share stories so that understanding can be made. At least for me, that's my understanding of it. I know that some people don't use books as that, but like the hope is that's the majority of like trying to read diverse stories, is to share that knowledge about the experience of being in these different bodies. I think that that's one of the things that I really feel is lacking. I feel like it's something that I noticed in my research that I couldn't find. I cannot tell you, I am lobbying for the next writer out there to, one, write a horrific Black witch story, because anything I could find was either YA or shows and movies just didn't exist. Characters, yes, but like main characters that own the show, barely any. And when it came to book recommendations, while I could find Black witches in books, there were hardly any that were actually horror stories. I could not easily find a lot that were horror stories, which is really, really interesting to me, because I thought that that would be the easiest topic to find, considering Black people in our history. Our original religion and spirituality coming from Africa had to do with the African six powers, and that had to do with gods and goddesses and witchcraft at its root, and root work and conjure and all these things that when we were brought here, we were indoctrinated into Christianity and have adopted. There was plenty of witchcraft happening, and so it's interesting there's not a lot of books looking at that, especially from a darker and horrific space. And that's interesting to me. I don't believe that they're not being written. I just think that they're not as easily accessible if you're looking for them. Monsters I can find a lot of. So shout out to the green light on monsters. I know that while I had a very broad description of what that is, I do still feel like finding movies about it was a lot easier. Shows was much harder. Shows were hard across the board to find. We got to start greenlighting some horror shows. I know that there's the Changeling out there, and I know that there are plenty exceptions. It's not all or nothing again. But I did realize that it was hard to easily find a lot of shows that were in the horror genre that featured Black people as the main character. If you are still looking for them, go check out my Black horror recommendations movie that I put out a couple of weeks ago. It is extensive. It is an hour long. It has so many recommendations, but it was difficult. And especially ghosts. Again, interesting that you couldn't really find a lot of ghost shows at all. And again, going back to like culturally, Black people believe in ghosts. We believe in ghosts, we believe in angels, we believe in the other side. So the idea that it is that hard to find any content of us experiencing it is very interesting to me. And it makes you wonder, like, why is that? Because there's evidence to say that it's not that we're not experiencing those things. So why is it that we haven't found anything in regards to any of that? And there are just tons of vampire stuff, though. I was shocked with how much vampire stuff I could find. I don't know if this has to do with the information I uncovered about the very first American vampire novel and first anti-slavery novel, short story being about a Black vampire. I don't know if there's a connection there, like subconsciously or something. But there was an abundance of Black people either being vampires or fighting vampires. So that was not hard to find. And I think that was also another thing that was really interesting. I really think that this month has been a very interesting one in realizing the importance of these stories. The show of a really amazing book is this character has nothing to do with me and I somehow still felt this relation or I learned from them. Now, I will say YA horror is showing the hell up nowadays. There are so many YA horror books that are absolutely amazing. Plot-wise, character-wise, covers are amazing, interesting. A lot of my recommendations had to do with YA horror and thriller and suspense. And I read those books and the synopsis thinking, this don't even sound like a YA horror. And not in the sense that it was super horrific, just that it was well written and like well rounded. So really excited to read more YA horror, to be honest. And this is kind of like a little flag to you to be like, hey, don't write up YA. Although I think that there has been a lot of conversation and discourse recently around the fact that YA no longer is really YA, and that middle grade books no longer exist. That's for another day. But if you are somebody who is sitting there like turning down YA because you're like, oh, I'm not YA, I'm not like some young child, maybe you should do so quickly, because there really are some amazing books out there that are like well-rounded and nuanced and exciting. I keep on using that word nuanced. That is really the word of the day. And that's exciting. I think that like it, you know, I feel like young adults deserve to have some entryway into horror. I think when a good portion, a series of unfortunate events to horror pipeline for a lot of us millennials, I think is real deep. I feel like every single person who now reads horror or thrillers and everything read all of these series of unfortunate events when they were growing up. It really was like the baby thriller. It was like, this is now a pipeline. You're gonna read nothing but unhinged lit fic when you get older now because of reading about these children and their lives with this crazy man. I think that there's a lot to still talk about regarding the genre and what responsibility do books have to their readers, to their communities. And Black horror is such a deep genre and has such a responsibility within it that I don't think enough people talk about. I really think that it's just that important, especially in a genre of like horror and something that isn't so happy. It's still an important story to still tell, because being as multifaceted as we are as a community, we should be allowed to have all of those stories be told, even the ones that aren't necessarily super happy endings, and them still being valid to be read and to be put out there. Jeez, it's gonna be a great time editing all of this. I really truly again had such an amazing time this month. I cannot wait to do this again next month. I cannot wait until further, like, the plans that I have going on this year, because I did realize I want to do something similar to this every month. That is Women's History Month next month. Okay, got it. Let's build a TBR around women's stories and everything. Okay, Latin Heritage Month. Let's do the same. Asian Heritage Month. Filipino History Month. Let's do that too. Like, I really, really have loved analyzing and finding books that are just so different to what I'm usually getting told to read on all these platforms. And I found really great ones. I found some that I didn't like, but I found some really great ones as well. It was really kind of one or the other all month. But I had such an amazing time. I also had such an amazing time seeing so many of y'all just say like what a great time you were having. And it really was clear that like some of y'all really wouldn't have found those books had it not been some of the recommendations that were going back and forth. So I love that the discourse was started. I hope that it keeps on going throughout the rest of the year and everything. And I'm super excited to see what the rest of the year brings. I hope it's more people reading more Black horror, not just stopping in February and going, okay, well, I'll see you next year. Because it was really just a great time. It was really, really great time. So I hope some of the things that I talked about today were interesting, caused some discourse, caused you to think a little bit about what you're reading, what you're writing, what's being published, and what you as a reader can be doing to diversify your not just your books, but your shows, your movies, and everything. And if you're not seeing, be the change you want to see if you're able and in those spaces to do so. I had a great time today. Subscribe down below. if this was interesting to you. I go on rants quite often, but I had a great time. So yeah, subscribe down below. I'll be talking about books all year long. I love unhinged lit fic and sad girl lit fic and horror and thriller and all of that just gets you to start thinking about things. So if you do like that, subscribe down below. My next video will be my wrap up, which will be vlog style, as well as what I plan on reading all of March. I'll be reading I Support Women's Wrongs is the theme for next month's TBR, so get ready for that. And like the video if you liked it. Comment down below if you have anything to add to the conversation, if you have any questions to ask me about what I've talked about today. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye!